Hello. Time to dump some more thoughts into the ether. You know, I posted some things and I never thought that I would lose. Like, of all the silly things I've posted, I never really thought when I touched on some other topics that people would like unfollow me, which I always thought was funny. Like, all these random people just like unfollow me. I'm like, all right, well, I probably just popped into their feed and they're like, oh, yeah, I never liked him anyway. Anyway, I I've been trying to flesh out a concept in my mind of I often have talked about accountability as one of the most important things. Accountability for all, top to bottom. And actually the higher position and more you get paid, the more accountable you should be. In a novel concept, I'm sure. Um it's the it's the in-group issue and then providing preferential treatment to that in-group. And I and at some level I kind of understand that it's a double-edged sword because like oftentimes when you hire somebody who vouches for somebody, right? Like, oh, do you have a reference of somebody that we can trust, that we can look at you and see, like, are you what we need? The the other person that you have had a good experience with vouching for that person, like, provides a lot of like you cut through a lot of like I don't know. Everybody lies on resumes. Everybody's presenting their best selves. So I do understand at some point like how having a an in group or like a somebody who's gonna put their neck out for you is a big deal. But I think the issue arises when organizations or structures get created that begin to protect and apply additional resources to the protecting or vouching for an individual, right? Like, it's like political endorsements, like, oh, this person endorsed me. But if you were to pull the layers back and realize that they're the they're members of the same fraternity or the same Masons Lodge or the same, what have you, X, book club or whatever, business association. Like, once you find out that that's part of the reason that they protected each other or they did X, Y, and Z, you're like, that seems like it's less about the capability of the person and it's more about the perpetuation of the organization and its power. And I think that's one of the problems that we're experiencing at a very massive level is they're going to catch us straight. I'm sorry. Frat boy effect, right? Um, Fraternities are often questioned for their behaviors and what they do behind closed doors. And then they all kind of go mum's the word when something happens. Like, or will actively help to protect somebody. But I think we've seen that concept, not to just single them out, but I think we've seen that concept bleed into other organizations. I would say certain mega churches, certain evangelical groups do the very same thing, where to us, so like why I'm saying us is regular people, we would find a behavior reprehensible and we would have our concerns, but maybe we're not on that in group, so we don't know what's going on. I'll take, I'm gonna pick on Christy Nome and her husband, right? Like, it apparently was an open secret in Washington, D.C., that she was having an affair with her chief of staff, and that her husband seems to have been, you know, chatting with sex workers and doing all sorts of weird stuff, all the while like portraying themselves as like this very loving, upstanding Christian family on a as like a cover story. Now, maybe at one point there were. I don't know. I'm not like I would hopefully give them the benefit of the doubt, but it seems like they got real tied up into some really bad things, and I wonder what their children's experience has been with parents like that, right? And it would be embarrassing. Like, I talk pretty openly about what I know about my mom and sometimes my dad. And like I would say they weren't very great. They weren't great people. They like to party, they like to do their stuff. They like to, like I know that my mom did like cocaine, like lots and lots of cocaine in the 80s. And I know like my mom was just always down for like whatever and did wild stuff and just had poor decision making. And that could be linked to a bunch of reasons, but at the end of the day, that's how she lived her life. And like it was very costly. Well, and for her, and it ended up being very costly for her, and it was very costly for those around her. It strained relationships. It's a whole thing. So I don't know that the fallout is ever measured when people live like a double life. And at some point, my family situation, there was not a double life being lived. There was just like I'm doing my thing. I'm gonna drop my kid off so I can do my thing, which was super fun. Um, Interesting. A new mine is opening. Huh. So I think in the LDS scripture in the Book of Mormon, I think there are some like really interesting lessons on. They're frequently just called secret combinations, right? Like that's what they're called. They're these groups that get together and they collude in darkness and they're evil and seedy. And maybe they didn't start off that way. Maybe they started off as a book club or like a, who knows. But but then they started to use this to like, gain power. And I think we see a ton of that right now. It seems like every politician that goes to Washington suddenly changes who they are. They become a member of the in group. They become that member of Congress and they lose who they are and why they're there. And I think the problem is that most of them went there because of that, not in spite of that. They wanted to be a part of that group. The saying that absolute power corrupts absolutely. I did have an interesting there's a social media person running for Congress in Texas, one Brandon Herrera. I've been a fan of his content. No, I don't agree with him on all of his politics, and I'm not as much of a Second Amendment absolutist. I am a believer in the Second Amendment. I'm not necessarily opposed to like background checks and reasonable licensing, but I do think we have some like ridiculous like the fact that silencers. It's like I mean they would make firearms a little more auditorially safe. They would make a lot of things better. I don't really see them to be a problem. The report of a firearm is not the problem. In fact, probably causes more trauma than anything else. Anyway, so I'm not as necessarily a free speech or a Second Amendment absolutist. I am much more of a free speech absolutist. Um, but I can see that the rationality and like the whole like, oh, you can have this and not that. And I'm like, if you know what, if I want to go get the license to have, I don't think it should be so crazy expensive, but it's like I'd like to have a machine gun. If I want to go pay for a $500 license and make sure that I just have to register it, then what's the big deal, right? Like I can have a car, I can have a monster truck. Like if I'm gonna take the time to do it correctly, it's like, well, criminals do it regardless. They Firearms are technically illegal in Mexico and they are flooded in there, right? Like it is an entire thing. So or like outside of like a few hunting rifles, most of the weapons are supposed to be illegal. And that's in lots of countries. And all sorts of criminals have firearms. But I think each side not acknowledging a little bit of the argument of the other correctly, like, yeah, maybe some limited licensing and some, this person appears to be a concern, and like Joe Schmo down the street calls in and says, should a, a, a red line or whatever they call it report where your guns get kind of taken away. I mean, there needs to be a very defined, like, we're going to take until this finishes X, Y, and Z, and this has to be done in a timely manner. Like, yeah, they're going to come and take your firearms. Like, I understand that being a concern, but it's also times like oftentimes police officers who there's issues with. So I don't think that's a bad thing. And oh, they could lose their job. Maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Do you want somebody who's kind of unstable or like having domestic violence issues? Should that person really continue in that position? You'll ruin their livelihood. Yeah, we seem to be okay with that all of the time for like lower income people. Like, oh, they got a DUI. If you take away their license, they'll lose their job. Well, then they shouldn't have got a DUI. Why does that logic not hold? Like, right? Like, you made a bad choice. You now get to pay consequence for said bad choice. And it might be a really, really bad consequence. We just need to stop waffling and hold people accountable. Also, with like Uber and all of that, like, oh, maybe there's an option to arrange for a buddy to pick you up or to Uber to work. And maybe it's more expensive, but those are options. A court supported Uber system where you'd be like, ah, man, I gotta like the court will help get a better rate for you if your license is suspended. I look a Supra. It's a good looking car. It's a really good looking car. Little John Deere tractor right there. Anyway, just random thoughts this morning. I think we just need to, once again, accountability, and like we got to pull this decision making out into the light for the most part, so we can understand how and why decisions get made or who gets protected. Because like it seems like there's a bunch of bad people protecting bad people. At like the Epstein class and all that, they participate in this horrific like. There's a lot of like regular stuff, and then a bunch of people that participate in this other stuff, and it becomes this problem of like you might have even been tangentially aware of what was going on, but you didn't ask, you didn't want to pry because you didn't want to, the burden of knowledge. And so you're somewhat guilty for not speaking out, but you also didn't get the information that you could speak out with, and it's hearsay. And boy, I'll tell you what, you hear like rumors, and you're like, a long time ago in college, I kind of decided I was going to do like one ear to the ground, one ear to God, right? Like I'm going to keep one ear listening to what's going on around me, and I'm going to keep one ear to God. And that's how I'm going to try to live my life. And boy, like you hear enough rumors about something, you're like, yeah, that there might be something there. And you kind of talk about that. And then you end up in front of like people with actual legal power, and they're like, hey, what do you know about this? You're like, whoa, hang on. Listen, everything I know is second and third hand. And they're like, well, I can't do anything like that. I was like, well, that's what I have. I have second and third hand information that was enough to me for me to warn people. And that's all I had. But it was enough that I was just concerned. Nothing actionable. What am I supposed to do? Because I don't have anything direct that I can be like, well, that I'm like, I heard a rumor. Like that's also dangerous. But it was enough for me to warn people. And then they're like, they get mad, and then they want you to go one step further. I'm like, I can't go one step further because I don't have any direct knowledge. You would have to go ask these individuals. Oh, we're little little blue raz ghost. I'm trying to cut back to one a day. Means I need to sleep more. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, have a great day.